Hello again, amazing internet person, and welcome back to Null by Design. This time, taking a bit of an adventure through the dungeons in my mind as we get ready to finally actually start the book club for Dungeon Crawler Carl coming up in the next weeks. This time, in preparation of that, talking a bit about MMORPGs, massively multiplayer online role-playing games, which Dungeon Crawler Carl obviously draws direct inspiration from, and the time that I have spent with those games, because, to be real honest and to give it a unit of measure, I am someone who has played a sadness of MMOs. Really invested a lot of time over my life in these different social spheres. And I want to spend most of this time kind of discussing about the difference between the early sandbox MMOs and the middle to later theme park MMOs. And in the spirit of this being a lukewarm take and not a hot take, there's not going to be any clean split between sandbox and old MMOs were good, and theme park and new MMOs are bad. Instead, I think that MMOs have played a lot of different roles as that technology has developed, as we have explored all of the different spaces and variations of these games and the different ways the technology supports them and the interaction of players, and that has really just been something that has evolved. I am no longer a real active MMO player. I still have an account on Elder Scrolls Online, and I've been picking that back up and playing it just a little bit, though we'll get to that game a little bit later in the context and history that I think that it fits in. But I'm someone who started off with the old school MMOs. Someone who started off, in fact, with MUDs. I am someone who had friends who made some MUDs, even some very small niche MUDs that were contained only to the school I went to and catered only to a player base of maybe a dozen people. But MUDs and the text-based world isn't something I'm going to really dive into. It is not something that I spent a really long time in. It is not where I really cut my teeth. But I do want to acknowledge that that is a rich world of gaming. That is an entire landscape of just wonderful little gems all over the place that really gave people something to do in what was the very early days of the chat and chat room experience that provided a gameplay basis to organize around, and that both supported role-playing. In some cases, it almost blended in with the idle game and clicker game genre. It had elements of the early text-based Zork games in some instances, but just like the world of MMOs covers the whole range of possible types of gameplay, captured the whole range of possible types of players of games, and really deserves credit on its own, go seek out content about that world of gaming on its own, because it is a rich tapestry of stories. But where I really started out in the world of MMOs, and in those early days of primarily sandbox MMOs, was Ultima Online from Origin Studios Electronic Arts. The world of Richard Garriott brought to life as a multiplayer game. Those were the Ultima series in general, just a very interesting exploration of several generations of how to make and build games and worlds, and which in and of itself explored the fact that the avatar was, as the hero of the story, in many cases just a guy who had been sitting at his computer and fell into a fantasy realm, who was drawn into a fantasy realm. Not quite hit by a truck in the isekai truck simulator sort of narrative plot device there, may even to a great degree precede some of that particular concept and genre, though I don't know enough of the history there to have any solid comment on it. But something that already, as a game, through the Ultima series, narratively conceptualized being a regular person drawn into a fantasy realm. So the crystallization of that as one of the early MMOs was something that I think players of those games, fans of those games, very naturally fell into. If you're not familiar with Ultima Online, it is a fantasy realm, somewhat high fantasy, does not really have quite the same Tolkien conception of multiple races of humankind, is a little bit closer to a low fantasy genre in that sense, but has the full panoply of magic in it. So, high fantasy from that perspective. It had its own very established world of Britannia, again, coming to it from a series of, I don't know if the 9th game had released by the time the MMO did, but had at least 8 games preceding the MMO, which spanned from pixel gameplay to isometric wonder. Ultima 9 was a full 3D adventure. It is its own exploration of what happens when a studio that had focused on smaller scale development gets bought by a much bigger player, Origin Studios being purchased by Electronic Arts, and how that can impact the artistic vision and direction. Probably not entirely for the better, although still a game that I very much enjoyed. But Ultima Online was, in a very pure sense, a fantasy sandbox MMO. You could go in, it included combat skills, magic skills, crafting skills, and had absolutely no leveling system. Instead of levels, you just, in almost the sort of, I guess what would now be termed the Skyrim model or the Elder Scrolls model, the more you used a skill, the more your points in that would develop. Skyrim still has that overall player level attached to it. Ultima Online did not include any player levels. Your stats, other than the skills you could develop, were fairly fixed, so all players on a pretty even playing field from the sense of what your basic health and mana pools were and what you were working with in that sense of mechanics. And you could develop across any number of skills. You had a limited skill pool, 700 points, with the point system going from 0 to 100 in any given skill, so the ability to in the parlance of the game, grandmaster 7 skills total, or invest those across a wider pool of skills to a lower degree. And it is a game that very much supported you were going to, with any given character, need to make those choices. You could master a couple of combat skills and a couple of crafting skills, but that probably wasn't going to end up with you having a real optimal mix of what you could do. So players tended to focus on fully combat and magic builds, or fully crafting builds to a much greater degree. This was also a game that did not have any world chat, especially when it started off. It was purely local chat. You could see the text over other players' heads that they typed in right there, purely locally. You could, to some degree, shout and maybe see that text from slightly farther than a screen away, but it was a local sandbox game that really emphasized your community is the local players that are around you there in the world. If you wanted to craft and trade. You needed to physically first engage in harvesting materials and then crafting items, but then also pitching yourself as a crafter to the people in your immediate vicinity. That is what I focused most of my time in over the years that I played Ultima Online. I was primarily a crafter. For quite a while, I was involved in the United Blacksmiths of Britannia, which was a literal trade union. It had fixed price and pay structures for items. It held guild houses. I was one of the people who was a caretaker of a guild house on the Pacific Shard or server. And again, really a game that was about those social connections. There was no narrative content that did not exist from players' knowledge of the Ultima world in general. There were some incredibly basic story mechanics. No real narrative. You could get things like escort missions or find the hidden item missions. But there was no quest system. There was no one handing out content that said, hey, go to this dungeon and kill 5 things. That was not even within the concept of the game. It was very much, you are in this world, you are with these players, and it is entirely about the story that you are constructing. This is, in my view, the purest sandbox experience. Everything past that sort of in-game development brought on more and more senses of narrative from it. Now, the team who was building that game did do events. There were storylines taking place, but they were, again, entirely acted out. This was not content that you were going to a quest giver and seeing how it would go. If something happened in the world, it happened in the world at the time that it happened, and that was truly the only way to experience that content, especially because this predated YouTube. It predated streaming. There was not quite yet the sense of doing much recording of these events. Obviously, people were taking screenshots. They were retelling stories of these events. But in that sense, you have a more oral, bardic tradition of how those events took place. It is through the description of other players. It is from the snapshots that they have captured and the way that they are crafting their own story about the events that occurred in-game. That was how that information was transmitted, with all of the richness of that, as well as all of the drawbacks of imperfect information being transmitted about what was going on. Really a wonderful time. I really loved and supported that game and that set of communities that I was a part of. But it is also something that makes that kind of game inherently difficult to engage with, especially for new players. There's not a lot of ways to get involved in that without really wanting to be involved. Another game that I think is primarily a sandbox, but is another example that I will give that is more on the science fiction side, was Anarchy Online by Funcom. Another game where you had no real meta-narrative being given to you by quest givers. There was a mission system, but the mission system was giving you basically just random content. Again, things like, go find the item, go kill everything in this series of rooms. It gave something for players to reliably be able to do with each other as groups. But this was not story content. It is again something where the story, the narrative is being driven primarily by the player base. In Anarchy Online, as opposed to Ultima Online, which really had no faction system, did not have that much of a set of narratives that was taking place. There was Lord British and Lord Blackthorn sort of representing good and evil within the Ultima universe, but that was really only there very minimally. You had to already know about those stories, already know what was going on to engage with it. Anarchy Online came with a much more defined set of factions and themes that came along with it. Anarchy Online, as a sci-fi setting, is very reminiscent of Dune, which, if you happen to know the name Funcom now, you may know of their Dune Awakening game, which is now not so much an MMO. It is an MMO. It is a small-scale MMO in many ways, and one which most of the MMO mechanics turned out to not be what everyone quite wanted on a day-to-day basis, and so they are scaling back to a offering of a more solo play experience. But Anarchy Online represents a much earlier version of what you could see Dune Awakening become today. The world of Anarchy Online is a science fiction setting. It is, again, very reminiscent of Dune in a lot of ways. It is a planet that has a resource that everybody needs. In this case, it's not the spice, it's Nodum. Nodum is a semi-magical mineral. It provides near limitless energy to power all of the super technologies of the sci-fi world, and more so, it allows for the, in essence, capturing or copying of souls and their revivifying. So you have why you can die and come back welded into the story of why people are mining Nodum. It gives basically unlimited life to the denizens of the universe. And that also gives you a really great explanation of the mechanic without having to respawn in a graveyard and just, hey, spirits and resurrection are just a thing that we've established in fantasy games because it's kind of a bummer when you die. So, giving the concept of you are getting cloned and copied. And with that, at least at the beginning of the game, I'm not sure if it persists to this day. I believe the game is still running, though it would obviously be at a very small scale. Both Ultima Online and Anarchy Online, as very early games, are only going to continue to be able to really cater to fairly niche audiences. But you get that full concept of cloning within Anarchy Online, and as a consequence of that, there are also penalties to dying. You lose the experience that you would have gained in between your last scan and your death. So also gives that nice narrative tactility to the world around it. But this is another very sandbox game. The content is coming from the players. It has factions. There is the Omnicorp, which is the owner of the planet Rubica, which you are on. Given that there is a very clear, not obviously necessarily evil corporation, but I think the more we live our lives, the more we see monopolistic companies as having some inherent evilness through their tendency to exclude, to oppress, to suppress. And that was very true of Omnicorp, with its rules, regulations, and world enforced by Omnipol, who were basically stormtroopers. Their armor was very, very themed on stormtrooper armor. It wore its influences very much on its sleeve. Between Dune, between Star Wars, you could see where those influences were coming from. And as such, as opposed to Omnicorp, there was the Rebellion. Also the Neutrals. I never really interacted all that much with the Neutrals, but there was also a very clear set of rebels. Because I was looking for cities where I could find my way from point A to point B relatively easily, I ended up on the evil Omnipole side. The game had corporations as the representation of the regular guild system that's obviously familiar from any MMORPG of any modern design. And those corporations really ended up being what in this sandbox realm generated most of the content. Some later DLC did introduce full storyline and narrative content and mission systems that you were following, but that was, all things considered, fairly late in its development cycle. For most of its history, what drove its story was again purely that player base, the people who were wandering around doing things in the world. As a member of Omnicorp, I happen to be a member of a corporation miming itself as Omnipole, and we did full events. We did patrols, we did raids. Many of these were in coordination with corporations on the rebel side so that we could act out stories that if you were there in the world, you could witness, be a part of. After a raid or a patrol, you would go down to a bar in one of the cities, and again, players would be able to join in on this and really have that participatory function within that gameplay space. Anarchy Online was my first experience of where there was a lot more meta events going on. Guilds from Ultima Online needed to rely on a lot of external technologies to communicate and coordinate, but Anarchy Online took that another few steps further, in that events that were taking place in Anarchy Online often had things like live DJs for big events. So you were in the world before Spotify, logging into web radio systems so that you could all experience the same music at the same club in the same game. But it took all of that as player organization. There was no music system within the game that would support that, like some later games have made some strides in developing. And again, though very different in terms of a lot of its systems, two different sandboxes representing more of a fantasy world, representing more of a sci-fi world, but those were where I really enjoyed spending my time. I was a big fan of those sandbox games because at the time, I was going through high school, college, times where I had a lot of free time that I could invest in those living communities. And it was a lot of fun, that sense of being able to bring your friends along. Ultima Online, I had a decent bit of family that was playing for a while, and so it gave a second or a third space for a lot of these social interactions. But these are things that really lacked that narrative element. Again, unless you were invested in really wanting to play a role in those worlds, there wasn't otherwise a lot of reason to join. And so what came naturally out of that, I think, are the theme park MMOs. The one that is the most recognizable, the most obvious. If someone has heard of an MMO, odds are the one that they have probably heard of is World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft really brought everything from these very niche worlds to the mainstream in a way that I don't think any of us really expected that MMOs would go. If you are an MMO player, odds are you think that a lot of people are playing these games, that these are a huge part of the market. And some of them are real big games. But they're still a pretty niche world within gaming. And the sandboxes, for all of my love of them, are not things that I think any of us could consider to be titans of gaming. Ultima Online, Anarchy Online, even at their largest, quite small communities. World of Warcraft really really changed that. There were a lot of other theme park and story-based MMOs that preceded. EverQuest was doing the yeoman's work of really establishing the genre of the more theme park space before World of Warcraft took off. But it is World of Warcraft that won in that space. I played WoW from day one. It has been a long time since I've played, but I am someone who played from day one, who played pretty consistently with a set of friends for quite a while, and came back pretty regularly when they released their different DLC updates. And it's that. World of Warcraft really brought to us the DLC treadmill, because that is one thing where you can truly see the difference between the sandbox and the theme park MMO. EverQuest, EverQuest 2, all of the things in the theme park world are sort of forced into this model, and not really forced, they choose this model. But you have to be putting out very regular increments of content if you are going to be a narrative theme park. And I don't have anything against that. I think there are a lot of, not unfruitful discussions, but they can get, I think, a little bit too filled with venom when we think about, they keep charging me to play more of this game. Especially when we consider the monthly fee plus DLC model. I can understand where that gets players upset. But I'm not going to focus too much on the economics argument there. It is, however, a model that needs to be embraced when you are talking about the theme park game. When you have that narrative content, when the point of experiencing the world is to find the dude with the exclamation point over his or her head and go and do what they say, that means you are going to get through that narrative, you are going to be able to reach the end of it, and you are going to want more. The sandbox games managed to have a very different vibe by divorcing themselves from that narrative content, from not having it from the very get-go. In some ways, because it wasn't necessarily easily supported by the technology at the time for those very, very early MMO experiences. But by the time WoW comes along, you easily have that technological support to drive those systems. Again, as already established by other games. Again, EverQuest is probably going to be the earlier title that a lot of people from the communities recognize and will contend did it first and better anyway. But World of Warcraft perfected that formula, brought everything that Blizzard could bring to bear on that, especially in its early iterations where you have a company that can put together trailers that are much more epic, much more visually packed and mature and polished than what almost any other studio can bring to bear in that realm. And that brought players, and it brought a very fun world. Again, this is not going to be a comparison between how sandbox good, theme park bad. The theme parks are extremely fun to play through. I have had countless hours of joy playing through the theme parks with friends. World of Warcraft being the first, taking up quite a bit of time in college. Also, EverQuest 2 got mixed in there. But World of Warcraft was really much more of that ongoing and continuous game that I played for really quite a long time, and the one that took over from the sandbox games for me. When it started off, it had a lot more of those sandbox sorts of elements. The going to skill trainers after your levels, investing in skill trees in a way that you still do in the current modern incarnation of World of Warcraft, but something that has largely disappeared. It has become a much more streamlined experience. And again, not a bad thing. that is something that gives new players a way to very swiftly engage with your content, to get involved in a world, and to know what they are doing in a way that more purely sandbox games really don't support. And as we sort of think past the development and ongoing development of World of Warcraft, obviously it is still the titan in the space, as much as everyone has touted some new upcoming game to be the WoW killer. They simply haven't. It is still the one to beat in most ways. But the game that I spent, and 2 games that I spent quite a lot of time on, that again took the theme park world and learned all of the lessons that they could from World of Warcraft. Elder Scrolls Online was really one of the games that I have gotten a lot of enjoyment out of. It really leaned into the lessons of the theme park world, coming with a lot more content immediately out the gate than World of Warcraft had. Again, coming from an established studio that had an established lore base. If you know Elder Scrolls, you know Elder Scrolls. It was something that came with an established IP and could really swing with it. World of Warcraft had to build a lot more of its world. It had a very well-established IP, but it came from a world of real-time strategy games. So it had to build a lot of systems that had not fundamentally existed for that IP within it. A studio that had all of the storytelling and narrative-focused gameplay that it needed to come with to be successful in that area, but not something that was producing the same kind of game with that particular IP when it came out with World of Warcraft. It had to have learned all of those lessons from its Diablo series and then applied them to the WoW model and to the WoW IP. Elder Scrolls Online came with a very extensive role-playing game pedigree in and of itself. It did not have to contend with any RTS past in what it built. But one of the things that I think came with it, and it leaned into the theme park by also distinguishing itself as a game in which all of the NPC content and story content is fully voiced. And that comes with both good and bad parts. By really leaning in on we have voiced content, one that does help draw players into the story. It also, I think especially as the game has evolved, has made much of that content fairly generic. WoW had some pretty strong storylines, especially through its DLC. It has told the story of a living and evolving world in a way that I think has really done credit to what they've tried to do, regardless of whether any particular DLC is considered good or bad, a success or a failure, either commercially or narratively by its different audiences. I'm not going to weigh in there. I'm not going to go on a DLC by DLC narrative quest of my own. But I do think that it has managed to weave together a story that has a lot of compelling edges to it. Elder Scrolls Online, unfortunately, did not capitalize on the MMO world in the way that it was able to through its single-player games, where you have a beautiful, evolving storyline in the single-player games. And I know some people have all kinds of complaints about the quality of any given Elder Scrolls game and its narrative and whether it's really all that dynamic or not. But they are worlds where, especially as a single player, you can sink your teeth into it, get lost in it, and really spend a lot of time getting to understand a world. As an MMO, you're going from place to place, and there are a whole lot of cults and rebels and bandits that have taken over every town, city, and glade that can be imagined. It really seems like a terribly mismanaged set of places. And sure, that's true of the single-player games as well. There are a lot of places that seem like they could be under better control of the governments that are there in the world. But from an MMO perspective, and especially from a we're voicing all of this content perspective, you have a lot of the same happening over and over again. And you have storylines that even call out the tropes in and of themselves, with characters saying, I sure hope we don't meet at midnight this time because the law sure does know when to look for thieves trading goods, and it's under the moonlight, so can't we just do this in the afternoon? It gets that self-referential. And that, I think, as opposed to the sandbox, has been the risk of the theme park. Theme park content in the world of MMOs that become the forever games of players. That's hard to do. That is a hard mountain to summit. Because if you have to keep putting out content on a regular basis, especially if people are going to need to be able to engage with it from the start to the finish, it's going to be tough to do something that really evolves the world all that often. Again, I think the reason why WoW has kind of stayed at the top of the pack is that it has managed to actually do that in a lot of ways. And it's been, I think, given the privilege of doing that because it has had such a large and consistent player base that it has been able to go through multiple major versions of itself and have continuity in player base to some degree. Elder Scrolls Online featured content that would evolve any given area that you're in to some degree. But there's only so far you can do with a world that has to be continuously accessible to an entire player base. You have to have people existing in the same world at the same time. But that's fine. Again, all of these things are going to come with their own trade-offs. Sandbox games get the immense privilege of forcing you to fill in the story in a way that modern games are simply not allowed to do. Most of us are looking to relax in games in a way that is not make your own community from scratch and build the story that you want to do. In all of the theme park games, there are guilds and groups that are doing that. But you don't have to. That is just an option. Whereas the sandbox games really require that of you as a player. You can just do what there is to do in the world, but that is a place where the theme parks have had a clear advantage of drawing players in and giving them a reason to be there, and that gives players a means to relax. The other one that came swinging with a really big, grand IP, and I think has been as successful in terms of crafting a world and story as World of Warcraft, is Final Fantasy, both 11 and 14. But 14 had a significantly more engaging story, more story in general, more voicing of that story, and I think melds the two worlds of World of Warcraft and ESO quite nicely. Final Fantasy XIV is able to draw on that whole concept of end-game content. World of Warcraft has its end-game raids, its end-game bosses, but it also came with the baggage that it has today of having a world of player modifications, and now WoW is really, really bound into that. It is a game optimized for the player modification. Final Fantasy decided to say, in a way that I think we only really probably also accept of a Japanese studio, said, no, we're not having any of that. We're not accepting player modifications, and we'll ban you for using them. our content is optimized for the human player using only the tools in front of them and that we've given you in a vanilla experience, and we expect you to exist within that because what we have made is a story and a set of challenges that are compelling to that experience. WoW has had to continuously upgrade its challenge factor because it lives in a world of modifications. Just very different things to have to contend with, and I'm getting a bit lost in that. So let's move on. What does this have to do with Dungeon Crawler Carl? As I've been reading through the dungeon, reading through the adventures of Carl and Donut, I'm reminded of all of these games, and in particular, the author came from the world of RuneScape. I have played some RuneScape, I understand the skill and level grind that exists within it, but it is not a game that I have spent enough time on to discuss it at any length. But it comes with this beautiful lineage of all of these MMOs, all of these ideas bound up in the experiences that these characters are going through. The world of Dungeon Crawler Carl, and I don't think that there are any real key spoilers in any of what I'm going to say. It may be some spoilers toward the world building, so if you want no information of it whatsoever, certainly feel free to, probably not listen to much of any of this. But without getting into any specific narrative spoilers that I can think of right off the bat, you have real people. Again, in that sort of Ultima sense, in that Ultima Online sense, in that Ultima 7 drawn through a portal sense, real people getting drawn into a dungeon that crosses between sandbox and theme park. Carl is going to have to navigate levels of the dungeon, levels that will have themes. In this way, very much like going in between any map or level of even like a single-player game like Diablo. In fact, Diablo may provide a better model overall of having a whole bunch of people swarm into the dungeon in the multiplayer sort of sense. But it is something that has narrative structure in that it is a Hunger Games survival type of narrative, where there is some sense of whoever survives the longest, whoever survives to the points that you can opt out from, that's who's going to make it. There is an end game narrative. But most people aren't going to make it. Most people are only going to get through, they hope to make it through level 1, though. Certainly a challenge if you are being taken from your regular real-world self and tossed into something, no matter how many game-type advantages you were given, to all of a sudden be in the world of an MMO. And that is where Carl and his cat find themselves, drawn into a real MMO. I don't even know quite what the term for it would be, because it's certainly not online, except to the extent that it is televised. But it's interesting to see a set of novels that isn't just lit RPG work, but that is so explicitly a commentary about the world of games that we have grown up in, that is very explicitly about the corporations around it. In that sense, it certainly has a pedigree that descends from Ready Player One. There are a lot of books that do cover what would it mean, what does it mean to be in between these worlds of fiction and reality. This does it in a much more direct, fun way in which, if you were an MMO player, the tactility of the Dungeon Crawler Carl universe is so immediately apparent. You can feel all of your experiences being drawn out in this. Now, the crawlers are the content, but in navigating, in figuring out the solutions to any of the world that they are faced with, it is, in that sense, I think, drawing from that world of sandbox gaming. The stories of the individuals, of the crawlers themselves, is the real content, is the content that we are identifying with. It is the thought of how would I, as a human being, exist in this world. Now, there are also narratives taking place on the dungeon levels, between the dungeon levels, as we get to in sort of what appear to be the later levels that have some grander narrative structures that are taking place within and through them. I've made it into book 2, so I'm starting to experience where that meta-narrative element, where that more theme park and narrative experience is being built into it, and I'm excited to see where it goes. But I am at just the infant baby step stages of where that part of the content, where the evolution of storylines within the dungeon will start to take place. But instead it is that more sandbox nature. It is Carl encountering other crawlers and the stories that emerge from those interactions that really is the meat, especially, I guess, of book 1, or entirely the story of book 1, is that sandbox of being in a world and the narrative only being what these players of games are bringing to it. And then again, as we get further into the books, as we get more into the narrative, it does appear to be bringing in a much stronger element of the theme park game, where you, as a crawler, are experiencing a storyline in, again, more of a Hunger Games style, where instead of just experiencing a narrative with the safety of being able to respawn should you do poorly at it, you are being involved in a storyline which will very likely murder you. And it is fun to read, it is fun to think about, and I'm really looking forward to doing the book club episodes that draw us deeper and further into this world, that better structure my thoughts about MMOs, better structure my thoughts about gaming and the histories of these games that I have spent a sadness of time playing. But I'm glad to see these stories keep emerging. This one is, again, I think Dungeon Crawler Carl within the world of lit RPG of this nature is appearing to be sort of its own World of Warcraft. It has hit a titanic proportion. I am coming to the books later than many are. My understanding is that a lot of people in particular have discovered these through what I have heard are absolutely astonishingly good audiobooks, and I've purchased the first 2 audiobooks because I am looking forward to getting that experience that's drawn so many people into this world. But right now, just reading the wordy words on the page so far. But I am really looking forward to engaging with it on more of its now extensive narrative output, its different ways of interacting with it narratively, to hear what people have put into it from a voice acting perspective, to see the graphic novel now on the shelves of bookstores. I haven't really done more than glanced through a few pages of that, but it is neat to get to see multiple interpretations of this work just as it is reaching book 8. So it'll be a long journey. I'm, again, right at the start of book 2, so a long way to go through all of this. Really looking forward to re-experiencing book 1 in another format because, well, again, I'm a neurodivergent dude on the internet who likes fantasy and gaming, so being able to repeat that experience time and time again, having a new world to come back to repetitively, to be able to find comfort, regularity, and regulation in, it's nice to find something of this nature, and it's nice to find something that overlaps with all of these other places where I have found a lot of comfort over time, where I have found a lot of different social communities that I got to be a part of, from being able to role play as an oppressive cop in a sci-fi world, to being a blacksmith union member in a fantasy one, to being able to play through and experience narratives of a very different scale in World of Warcraft, in Elder Scrolls, in Final Fantasy, of being able to experience a lot of different things that become mini fans forever games. And now we get a set of, perhaps, forever novels. So let's see where that goes. I'm looking forward to that. Again, hopefully we'll start that next week as I get through experience number 2 of the dungeon through the audiobook format. But I'm really looking forward to sharing those thoughts, feelings, and no critique, but analysis of what thoughts wander through my mind while we go through this book club adventure together. So until then, until we make it to crawling through the dungeon together, have an absolutely wonderful day, and I hope to see you again here in this space between the platforms.